guys, it's Mr. Newsom. This is going to be an intro to Parabolas. What you're going to be doing is you're going to be taking the notes with me, just like we do in class. I finally figured out how to get this to work. So starting next week, this should run a lot smoother. Most of your assignments are simply going to be to watch my notes videos, send me the notes, and then answer questions and take a quiz. So very similar to class. We're going to start. You will have a quiz on Friday. I'm going to post it to EdSpeed, if not later tonight, then tomorrow. Just a couple of things about the class. Please read my messages. A lot of you guys are emailing me, which is fine. I'm happy to help. But seriously, dude, like, it's a lot. So please read the wall. Most of your questions are answered there. There's only 4 assignments that you guys are physically turning in that I'm grading. The first one is the Khan Academy questions. After you watch the video, there's about 7 questions. That's called Parabolas Intro as well. So I apologize. A lot of you guys were sending me notes from that, thinking that this assignment was to take the notes from that, and it's not. I happen to name the notes we're about to take the same thing, so that's my fault. However, that's the first thing, is that Khan Academy quiz, and you don't have to send that to me. After you take it, I'll automatically get it. The second thing are going to be these notes. You're going to send them to me. Please use the submission, meaning don't email me these. Click on the assignment, and I gave you the option to upload a file. So just upload a picture right onto the assignment. Just make sure your name is at the top of each page of your notes that you send me for this. The third thing is going to be assignment number 4. Some of you guys are, you're messaging me. You're like, Mr. Newsom, I don't know how to do assignment 4. Well, yeah, dude, like, I haven't showed you how to do it. And I said in EdSpeed that you need to watch this video first, and the video obviously isn't uploaded yet. So that's going to be assignment number 4. That's going to be the third thing that you're going to send me. And you're going to do that the same way that you're going to submit these notes that we're about to take. Right in the assignment on EdSpeed, I gave you the option to submit those questions that I put on the PowerPoint on assignment 4, which you're going to learn how to do after watching this video today. The last thing is the EdSpeed quiz, which will be posted later today, if not tomorrow. So please read the wall. I know it's a lot. This is all nuts, to say the least, but it is what it is. That's all I really wanted to say about that. So without further ado, let's begin. What we're going to be starting is probably one of the most important units in Algebra 1, and that's simply because most of what you're going to be doing in Algebra 2 is going to be related to this. They're going to be related to these quadratic functions. And the first thing that we're going to kind of do here is we have 2 ideas here. The first idea, when we're talking about an introduction to parabolas, is that if I kind of split this in half, the 2 main ideas that we're going to be working with here is, the first idea is we have the standard form of a quadratic, and I'm going to write quadratic equation. And thankfully, we kind of know about that, right? So that's what we did in the last unit, in Unit 9. That's what we were doing. We were taking, these quadratic equations, and if you remember, the standard form is, and I'm going to write y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. And that's the standard form of a quadratic equation. When we say that an equation is quadratic, all that means is that it is going to be a polynomial, right? This is a polynomial. Even if I took these away, it's still a polynomial, right? It would just be a monomial, one term. But generally there's 3 terms, sometimes there's not. But generally when we talk about a quadratic equation, it's simply referring to a polynomial that has a degree of 2. So you're always going to see a second degree in the first term if it's in standard form, right? Highest degree down to lowest degree, at the end is your constant. Now when you graph these quadratics, the graphs that they make are called parabolas. We have a name for them. They're called parabolas. And these parabolas, they kind of look like U's. They look like a U, or they might be turned upside down. They might look like an upside down U. And those are the two ideas that we're going to be talking about. We're going to learn how to find some information, some basic information. This is why this is called Introduction to Parabolas. We're going to find some basic information from the equation of a quadratic and also from the graphs. We're going to start with the graphs because that's pretty easy. And what we're going to be doing here is there's a few things that you're going to have to determine. And we're going to kind of make a list here. So let's go here. And we're going to label this features of a parabola. Features of a parabola. And we're going to learn how to figure out some information here. So when we're looking at a graph of a quadratic, and also we're going to learn how to figure out the same information just given an equation. But we're going to start with these graphs. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to figure out if our parabola opens up or down. When you take your quiz, these are the things that I'm going to have you find. And the first thing I'm going to have you find is, does your parabola open up or down? The second thing is we are going to figure out what is the y-intercept. What is the y-intercept? The third thing we're going to figure out is, does your parabola contain what's called a maximum, or does it contain what's called a minimum? The fourth thing we're going to figure out are is what's called the axis of symmetry. And I'm going to write it here, but generally I refer to this as AOS. AOS, the axis of symmetry. And the last thing we're going to determine is not the last thing, but the next thing we're going to determine, so we have 4 so far. The fifth thing we're going to determine is, what is the vertex? What is the vertex? And the very last thing that we're going to determine is we're going to determine what are the x-intercepts? What are the x-intercepts? And when we talk about x-intercepts, these x-intercepts are referred to a few ways. And you need to know this because you're not going to see, sometimes you'll see, for instance, what are the x-intercepts, right? But other times they're not going to use the word x-intercepts. They'll use the following words. They're also referred to as the roots, zeros, or solutions. Roots, zeros, or solutions. So instead of saying, what are the x-intercepts, I could say, what are the zeros? Or I could say, what are the solutions? Or I could say, what are the roots? And you got to remember that's the same exact thing as x-intercepts. So this is kind of a list that we're going to be making for a couple of examples. And we're going to make this list for the first few examples looking at the parabolas, and the next couple of examples looking at the actual equations. And this is the same information we're going to find in both instances. Let's do some examples. Example 1. I'm going to draw a parabola here. So let's draw a parabola. And we make a little coordinate plane. X-axis, y-axis. And we are going to plot a parabola. So let's put 1 through 6 on the right side, and I'm not really concerned about any of this, but let me see here. Give me 1 second. And let's come here. Let's label this y-axis down here. Let's do -1, -2, -3, -4. Let's do that. And the parabola that I'm going to graph here, I'm going to put an x-intercept here at 2. I'm going to put an x-intercept here at 6. I'm going to have this point down here at 4, -4. And I am going to connect these points. And I apologize, it looks like a V. This should be smoother. Let me do that. Right? So something like that, right? And this is going to be our parabola that we're going to use for the first example. So we're going to answer the questions, and I'm going to write them down. So let's start. Question 1. Does the parabola open up or down? Or down? Well, this question is super obvious. There's nothing I really need to say. This obviously opens up, right? When you have a parabola, it's going to open up or it's going to open down. And the trick is when your parabola opens up, your lowest point down here, we call that a minimum. It has a minimum point. Minimum point when the parabola opens up. Now when your parabola opens down, right, you don't have a minimum point. See, this keeps going down forever and ever and ever. But you do have a maximum point up here. So when it opens down, we call this a maximum point. So the first 2 questions that you're going to answer out of these questions here is the 2 easiest. Does it open up or down? Question 1. And the third one there, does it have a maximum or a minimum? So let's answer those 2 for this example. Obviously, does it open up or down? It opens up. And does it contain, I'm just going to write max or min. Max or min. Well, it obviously contains a minimum point right down here, minimum. And we're going to write minimum. Now, the minimum point and the maximum point, these are y values. So underneath that, I want you to write y equals question mark. Right? When you're talking about, like, look at this parabola. When you're talking about going down, reaching a minimum point, or going up, reaching a maximum point, you're talking about that y-axis. So if we're going to say that the parabola opens up, it contains a minimum point, we need to decide what is that minimum point, and that's the y value. So obviously this y value here is -4. The lowest it reaches is -4. So we do have a minimum at y is equal to -4. So those are the first 2 questions that you're going to answer. It should take you 5 seconds, super easy. Does it open up? Does it open down? If it opens up, it's going to contain a minimum. And if it opens down, it's obviously going to contain a maximum. Next question. What is the y-intercept? What is the y-intercept? Well, I didn't really label this, but I'm going to tell you right here. This parabola crosses this y-axis here at +12. +12. And remember, when you write intercepts, it's a point. That is a point. That is the point 0, 12. So we need to write 0, 12. Can't just write 12. So generally, those are the 3 questions that are the easiest. Those are the first 3 questions that you really want to answer right away because they don't require much knowledge or work. You can obviously just look at it in 2 seconds and figure those things out, right? All right. The next 2 things that we're going to answer here. Well, let's answer one more that's super obvious. When we're given the graph, it's obvious, and that's what are the x-intercepts? And for these parabolas, sometimes they'll have two x-intercepts, and I would say maybe 90% of the time they're going to have two x-intercepts, right? Because if you're talking about this shape, most of the time it's going to cross through this x-axis twice. And that's about 90% of the time it's going to have two x-intercepts. Now sometimes it'll have one x-intercept, so like for example, let's say I drew a parabola like this. Something like that, it's going to have one x-intercept, right? One x-intercept. You could also have no x-intercepts. You could have no x-intercepts. So maybe it's like up here. And this is a minimum point. It's a minimum point, so it's not going to go below that. It's never going to touch this x-axis. And that has no x-intercepts. And what we're dealing with most of the time, though, is right here. You're going to have two x-intercepts generally, right? So these are kind of your scenarios. Remember, 90% of the time you're going to have two x-intercepts. Sometimes you might have none. Other times you might have one. But the x-intercepts are easy, right? So if we look at this parabola, we have x-intercepts at 2, 0 and 6, 0. So 2, 0 and 6, 0. And this is exactly how you answer these questions. You know, there's nothing to really do here. I'm literally going to give you these questions, and you're gonna do it, right? So those are the easiest things to do. So most of this is easy. The only two that we're gonna have to like do some math for is the axis of symmetry and the vertex. And when I say do some math, I'm talking about in these equations. For the graphs, these are super easy, as you're seeing here. Let's do the last two. The axis of symmetry and the vertex are related. So let's do both of those at the same time. Axis of symmetry and vertex. Those two things are related. And how are they related? Well, let's talk about this vertex first. The vertex is the actual point that it reaches a minimum or a maximum. So remember earlier we said that this parabola opens up, so it contains a minimum. Well, that minimum point, that point where it goes from, this is going from decreasing, and then it starts increasing, right? It's that change. That's why it makes that little hump there. So that point's called the vertex. So I'm going to label this up here. So obviously you can see when you're given a parabola, you can figure out what that is real quick. It looks like this vertex is at the point 4, negative 4. 4, negative 4. So the vertex here, 4, negative 4. Now what is this axis of symmetry? The axis of symmetry is simply the x-coordinate of the vertex. So I'm going to circle the x-coordinate of that vertex, 4. And the reason it's called the axis of symmetry is if I go to the x-coordinate of 4 on this graph, right there, and I draw a vertical line, it cuts this parabola in half right through that vertex, meaning if you were to fold this over, it would be perfectly symmetrical. So when we talk about the axis of symmetry, it's simply the x-coordinate of the vertex. But we can't just write 4. Just like for maximum minimum, which is the y-coordinate of the vertex, if you can see here, that lowest point. If we're talking about the x-coordinate of the vertex, we need to write x equals 4. And the reason is this is a line. That line is x equals 4, meaning x is always 4. So when we talk about axis of symmetry, super easy. It's the x-coordinate of the vertex, but make sure you write x equals 4. If you write 4, it's wrong. And those are the questions that we're answering. Now, one thing that I saw in Khan Academy is the guy was talking about. I apologize for that guy. They're not all the best at doing this as I am, guys. That guy was kind of weird, but it is what it is. But now that I've got this set up, hopefully this is a lot better than that video. But what he was talking about is there's a question on that Khan Academy quiz where they give you. Let me zoom in. They give you the x-intercepts. They say, blah, 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 there's an x-intercept at 2, 0, and 6, 0, and it says, what's the axis of symmetry? Well, if you look at this graph, the axis of symmetry is always right in the middle of the two x-intercepts. So if you're given the x-intercepts, so we have an x-intercept of 2, we have an x-intercept of 6, and you want to figure out what that axis of symmetry is, you're just going to add them together and divide by 2. 2 plus 6 is 8, divided by 2 is 4, right? The axis of symmetry is simply right in the middle of these two x-intercepts. So I did see a question on there about that, but that's what he was talking about. However, most of the time, you're going to be given a graph, or you're going to be given the equation, and as far as a graph goes, as you can see, there's not much to it. Normally, I would do like a second example. However, you guys can watch this video as many times as you want. So if you want to practice this stuff, play the video again and do this example. There's really not much of a difference in, drawing another parabola here. Cool. All right. The next thing we're going to do, and it's really the last thing, is we're going to find out this same information, but instead of giving you a parabola like this, where you can see it's really easy, I'm going to give you the equation. And before I do that, let me give you the equation of this parabola, so that at the end we can kind of compare kind of what I did here. The equation of this parabola is let's write y equals x squared minus 8x plus 12. And we're going to circle back to that when we are finished with the second part. But that's the equation of this parabola. And meaning, if I just gave you that equation, which I'm about to do in a second, you can figure out all the same information, right? So let's learn how to do that. Example 2. Let's use the equation x squared minus 5x minus 24. And when you're given the equation of a quadratic, you can clearly see it's a second degree polynomial. And let's write the standard form underneath that. Ax squared plus bx plus c. And the first thing that you want to do when you get these equations is you want to write out what a, b, and c are. Because most of this stuff that we're going to find, this stuff, we're going to use a, b, and c to find it. So let's list that. In this quadratic, a is 1, b is negative 5, c is negative 24, right? And what we're going to do here is we're going to go through these same exact questions. So let's start. Question 1. Does the parabola open up or down? Well, to figure out if it opens up or down, here's what you do. You simply look at the a value. If a is positive, it's going to open up. If a is negative, it's going to open down. So obviously a is positive, so it is going to open up. So a is positive in your quadratic, it will open up. Negative, it's going to open down. Number 2, maximum or minimum. I'm going to write max or min. Let me put a box around here. What's on this page, guys, this is what you really need to maybe like put on a note card or kind of have out when you're taking your quiz. Because obviously finding out this stuff given a parabola like in example 1 is super easy. This stuff isn't hard, but you got to remember little things. So this is the kind of stuff that you want to maybe take a note of and don't forget where you wrote it. Max or min, well remember, if your parabola opens up, what I used to do, I remember when I was in Algebra 1 in middle school, I remember I would figure out if it opens up and then I draw it. I just go like that. And then once you draw it, you can clearly see that it's going to have a minimum, right? If it opens up, it's going to have a minimum. So it has a minimum. Now we do need to state what this minimum is, right? We need to state what this minimum is. But remember, the minimum is going to be that vertex, right? We're going to need that vertex first. So I'm going to hold off on that. But we can at least decide that it opens up. And because it opens up, because A is positive, it's going to have a minimum, right? And we'll circle back to that. Let me write y equals question mark. We'll answer that in a minute. The third thing, what was the next thing we did? What is the y-intercept? What's the y-intercept? Well, the y-intercept is simply the c value. It's the c value. Why is it the c value? Well, remember what a y-intercept is. A y-intercept occurs when x is 0. So if you look up here, if you made this x 0, it's going to go away. If you made that x 0, it's going to go away. In fact, in standard form right here, when you make these x's 0, that's all you're going to have left is c. So c is the y-intercept. C is the y-intercept. So the y-intercept here is negative 24. But remember, we need to write that point. 0, comma, negative 24. All right. The next few things, these are the first three things that I usually find, and that's simply because when you're given the equation, these are the easiest things to find, right? Easiest things to find. The last two, axis of symmetry and vertex, they're easy, but you're going to have to do a little bit of math. Just a little bit, I promise. So number 4, let's do axis of symmetry. And number 5, let's do vertex. All right, let's find the vertex. And we're gonna find the axis of symmetry and the vertex. So let me zoom in, and I'm gonna make a little separate place over here, like right here, just like that. And I'm gonna label this finding AOS. Finding AOS, meaning axis of symmetry. It's the first thing you're going to do before you find the vertex. You're going to find the axis of symmetry. Because remember, we don't have a graph to look at. All we have is this equation. Let me write it down again. X squared minus 5x minus 24. So all we have is this equation. I don't know where that minimum point is. I have no clue. I know it has one because A is positive right there, and it opens up. So I know it's got a minimum point, which is the vertex, right? It's the y-coordinate of the vertex. And the axis of symmetry is the x-coordinate. But we got to figure out what that point is. And here's how we do it. In order to find the axis of symmetry, here's what you're going to do. We use the equation